Valley resort on the central coast of New South Wales. And it was during the global economic crisis. And we went to look at the property, and Salvation Army structure, as the commissioner, I had what was called a cabinet, just like the Prime Minister does. I had a cabinet of colleagues around me. And we walked on this particular property, and one of my cabinet colleagues said to me as we walked along, this is to be a place of transformation. And so when we purchased that property, we named it Duralong Transformation Centre. Now, we purchased the property, I'll just get the facts right here. By the way, I'm just over 70. So we purchased the property, 345 acres, 140 hectares, a 4-star resort, it was considered, a hotel for 66 guests, 45 colonial cabins dotted throughout the property, a golf course, tennis courts, restaurant, swimming pool, a great 4-star resort. And we purchased it for $6.7 million. Now, today, at any one time, there are 150 people facing the challenges of their addictions and finding freedom. One of our advisory board members, when he was walking on that property, said to me, James, the infrastructure on this property is worth $30 million. Just over a week ago, the Salvation Army had the launch of the Brisbane Red Shield Appeal, a breakfast at South Bank, and I introduced the testimonial speaker that morning, Matthew Craddock. I want to tell something of Matt's story, just very briefly. He grew up in a good family, he would say, in the city of Sydney, but death in the family and relationship breakdown led him and his father into alcoholism. He would describe himself in those years as a very angry, broken man. He journeyed as an ice addict for 15 years. And he talks about his ice addiction costing him $2,000 a week. And if you work that out for 15 years, that's about $2 million plus. He became homeless. He lived on the streets of Sydney and on the Gold Coast. He became one of the top bikie gang leaders in Australia, and indeed in the world. If he was standing here, and Matt's met him and interviewed him for radio, if he was standing here, he would say to you that I have everything I wanted in terms of drugs, sex, and money. But a twist of fate, his own turned on him, the bikie gang at the clubhouse, beat him up in the car park, left him for dead. Talking at the launch of the Red Shield Appeal the other week, he said, I have a criminal record in every state in Australia. He ended up in hospital, multiple operations, all sorts of pins and things put in him, get his body back in order. But he was broken, a broken man, alone. Got to the point of suicide a number of times. But then, something happened. And he came to this Duralong Transformation Centre. But still an angry man, but a broken man. One night, because on Wednesday night and on Sunday they had chapel, one Wednesday night, he stood outside chapel, he tells the story, and he was talking to his ex-partner on the phone, they were arguing, using all sorts of choice language, outside chapel. And a lady come out and said to him, "Matt, you should be in chapel." And he told her where to rack off. And then she came out at the end of chapel, and he thought, "I'm gone. They're going to tell me to pack my bags and leave." And this lady walked up to him, looked at him and said, "Matt, can I give you a hug?" And he said, "What? What? Why would you give me a hug?" And this lady, who happened to be one of the manager's wife, hugged Matt Craddock, and he said, and I just broke down, wept and wept and wept. And for the first time in my life, Matt said, I knew what love was. Probably about close to a year later, I was there on an official visit doing a chapel service on Wednesday night, and Craig Stevens, the manager, said to me, "James, I want you to meet a man." And I went and met Matt Craddock. And you know, sometimes you meet someone and you feel a connection. I just felt connected. I felt connected with him. And so began a journey. And I said to Matt that night, when you graduate, which was about a month away, make contact with my office and let's have a meal together. As I say, many meals, many conversations, many prayers, many years later, and next year I will have the privilege of conducting his wedding to Laura. Today he is a successful businessman, having worked in executive management in Sydney and here in Brisbane, and now lives in Brisbane, and he's the CEO and founder of Click Digital. How much did it cost, the ice habit, for those 15 years? Up to $2 million. How much did it cost for the time in prison? According to the Productivity Commission, the annual cost of prisons in Australia, with about 40,000 men and women in prison, is about $4 billion a year. And the average age of those in prison in Australia, of those 40,000, is 35 years of age. I told you the figures of purchasing the Duralong Valley Resort and turning it into the Duralong Valley Transformation Centre. It has an annual budget of $5.4 million. And about half of that is funded from the Salvation Army's Red Shield appeal. But I want to ask you a question tonight, having told you all of that. How much does it cost to save a life? I want you to think about that for a moment. How much does it cost to save a life? Well, if you do some research on that, which I did, the median estimate of our top charities is it costs between $900 to $7,000 to save a life. In being introduced tonight, you've heard that I spent 4 years in that great country, our near neighbour of Papua New Guinea. 4 life-changing years. But I want to tell you, $1 can save a life in Papua New Guinea. $1 can save a life. So how much does it cost to save a life? 50,000? 200,000? 6.7 million? 5.4 million? I wonder what charity saves the most lives. Again, if you want to find that out, you can find it out just as I did, and it's the AMF. Do you know what AMF is? I didn't. But AMF stands for Against Malaria Foundation. That's the charity internationally that saves the most lives. Now, I already said I've served in Papua New Guinea for 4 years. I had malaria twice, so I know what it's like. But it used to break my heart when I saw children, ministers, pastors of the Salvation Army and others dying from preventable diseases because they didn't have the medication. There is a charity in the United States of America called The Life You Can Save. The London Telegraph newspaper in May 2020 ran an article and it said the cost of saving lives in the lockdown is too high. Is it? Now think for a moment of the way lives are saved. How much does it cost to save a life? Homeless shelters, rehabilitation centres, counselling services, meals, friendship, life-saving surgery. I just learned today of the death of a dear brother from Papua New Guinea. But when I was serving there, almost 20 years ago, we sent him to Brisbane for heart surgery, and that saved his life. And the surgeons and hospitals down here didn't charge us a penny, sending him down from Papua New Guinea. Life-saving surgery. Yes, lives are saved through homeless shelters, through rehab centres, through counselling services, through meals, through friendship, through life-saving surgery. Lives are saved through warning signs, fences, seatbelts, airbags. Which leads me to ask the question, can I have a second question? Yes. What's a life worth? What is a life worth? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Yes, I may have risen to the top position of the Salvation Army in Australia, but that means nothing. I've always, all my life, tried to stay in touch with the lost, the broken, the vulnerable, the homeless. And on Tuesday night, I lead a group at the Salvation Army at Caloundra called Just Men. We have a community meal at 5 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock, I run this group called Just Men. And so I move around the community meal, get about 80 people, usually, it varies. I look to talk to the men, and I saw a man on Tuesday night. He said, "My name's Trevor." I said, "I don't think I've seen you at the meal before, Trevor." He said, "No, I've never been here before." I said, "Where do you live?" He said, "I'm homeless, I'm living in my car." So I greeted him, and I knew that he'd been helped by the Salvation Army that day through Salvos Connect. He was there at the community meal. And then I went in to get ready for Just Men to set the room up. And Trevor walked in. One of the men had invited him. He said, "Oh, I just come in. I probably won't stay." But he stayed to the end. And he came up and thanked me. What's a life worth? Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6 verse 26, "Look at the birds of the air, they do not sow or reap or gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" How much is a life worth? How much are we willing to give to save a life? What can you give to save a life? For I think I know enough through my experience. And by the way, I could tell many stories. When I was young, my wife and I were stationed at Mount Isa. And we looked after the Salvation Army Church there in 1975-76. And the church was on the corner. Our house was behind the church. Next door to that was a homeless men's hostel for 15 men. Next door to that was a refuge for women and children. We ran the lot. There was no staff, no caseworkers, no counsellors. We did the lot. I know the experience. What can you give to save a life? You see, your giving may mean a person taking a phone call Your giving may mean someone trained to be a counsellor. Your giving may mean a van on the street. Your giving may mean a bed is available. Your giving may mean a meal is served, and much, much more. Now, I became a Christian at the age of 17 through the ministry of the Salvation Army in a small town, as it was then, on the south coast of New South Wales called Malaria. And after I came to faith, I was only 17, but I started to volunteer at the Inasmuch Children's Home. And the Salvation Army officer who ran the Inasmuch Children's Home was Major Myrtle Townsend. I got him involved in the ministry of the home, drove the bus, cooked the meals. This lady, one lady, who had 15 kids in the home sometimes, no help, Inasmuch Children's Home. Inasmuch. And these verses are often referred to or used, but I use them in closing tonight. Matthew 25, 31 to 40, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence. United Kingdom, Papua New Guinea, Australia, Spain. All the nations. Sorry if I missed yours out. That doesn't mean I left out. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world." Hear these words, because you've heard them so often, many of you. Don't lose their impact. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was sick, and you gave me clothing, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." How much does it cost to save a life? It costs some people their life. It cost God his Son. John 3:16, this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. Yes? How much does it cost to save a life? And how much will you give to save a life? Thank you for listening. God bless you.